Graceful greetings to all, and the warmest of delighted welcomes. Thank you for taking some of your time to watch my video. I beseech you to please stay with me till the end of this video. In this video today, I report that Michael Joseph Jackson, the American philanthropist, singer, and songwriter who passed away on the 25th of June 2009, was an intersex person. Michael Joseph Jackson, the Heal the World songwriter, was born with an intersex condition. On those bases, I appeal to all of us as mankind that please, everybody please, may we please free the fact that Michael Jackson was an intersex person. In the last 16 years, I have carefully investigated the truth about the health and appearance of Michael Jackson. I was only age 10 in 5th grade in year 2009 when Michael Jackson passed away. I had heard of the famous singer, but never had I directly engaged in any conversation concerning his history or personal life, nor had I ever taken any time or given attention to watching any of his performances or presentations. So after the death of Michael Jackson in the year 2009, our arts and culture teachers at school gave us activities about what they told us was the impact of Michael Jackson in culture, music, and society. Our arts and culture teachers at school gave us activities about what they, our teachers, told us was the legacy of Michael Jackson. I often did personal research about the subjects of the activities that I was learning at school in order to further understand the content and context of what I was learning at school. So I went to do personal research about the impact of Michael Jackson in culture, music, and society. I went to do personal research about the legacy of Michael Jackson in order to further understand the content and context in learning the history of Michael Jackson. So I went home and I looked for official information about Michael Jackson. I looked at photographs of Michael Jackson. I listened to audio tape recordings of Michael Jackson singing, and I watched videos of Michael Jackson singing and performing. As I watched Michael Jackson singing and performing, I detected that Michael Jackson had atypical physical sexual characteristics. And I also detected that Michael Jackson also had signs and symptoms of neurological and physical disabilities. I also detected that Michael Jackson also had signs and symptoms of severe genital injuries. Michael Jackson was assigned male, but Michael Jackson had several very visible female physical sex characteristics and some very visible unichoid bodily characteristics. Michael Jackson had a very female physical facial appearance with some infantile physical facial characteristics and some very defined female physical facial sex characteristics. Michael Jackson had a very slight feminine physical body build, or you would rather say a more unichoid body build with mild gynecomastia and slight progesterone body tissue. Michael Jackson had a very soft and sweet female-sounding high-pitched voice, that which sounded more like voices of young pre-adolescent female sopranos. Michael Jackson had signs and symptoms of hearing impairment and other oral complications. Michael Jackson had signs and symptoms of visual impairment and other visual complications, not exactly colobomatosis, but some other ataxic and coordinational visual impairments. Michael Jackson had signs and symptoms of spasticity or cerebral palsy. Michael Jackson also had signs and symptoms of autism or some other communication disorder. Michael Jackson had signs and symptoms of weak muscles, hypertonia, or some other form of protein hormone insufficiencies. Michael Jackson also had signs and symptoms of urinary and bowel incontinence. Michael Jackson also had signs and symptoms of heart complications and such other deficiencies. I questioned what was the cause or what were the causes of the signs and symptoms that I had detected on the body of Michael Jackson. Due to the hurtful impact of that I am one of the children living in our cruel world where atypical sex characteristics are often portrayed and expressed as characteristics of homosexual people and transgender people. I questioned, was Michael Jackson a homosexual person? Was Michael Jackson a transgender person? But due to the fact that Michael Jackson did not present the signs and symptoms of the psychological behavior and presentation that is often expressed and visible on homosexual people and transgender people, I more questioned, did Michael Jackson contract a disease that required him to use the kind of medication that prohibited the function of the reproductive system? Or was Michael Jackson a person born with congenital disabilities? I also questioned, was Michael Jackson a person that had a shutdown of his reproductive system due to contracting with a sexually transmitted disease? Though in that thought I also questioned, was Michael Jackson a person born with a sexual disorder that I may not know of? As I continued to question and pay attention to the videos of Michael Jackson speaking and performing, I also realized that Michael Jackson also had signs and symptoms of severe trauma and distress. I also realized that the people around Michael Jackson had maltreatment, nasty behavior, nasty attitude, and expressions of dislike and hate towards Michael Jackson. I also realized that in Michael Jackson's concerts, there was a lack of proper security. There was a lot of violence and sexual abuse towards Michael Jackson, interrupting the performances and official presentations. As a child, I had been studying physics, biology, and law. I had great interest in becoming a malformation specialist on the basis of protecting people born with congenital disabilities. But in all years of me doing research to what was my future interest or my future studies, never had I came across public education about natural, congenital sexual disorders or intersex conditions, if I'm to say. Never had I either been taught in the classroom about the existence of intersex people. I only had heard of a suggestion that they might have existed due to the fact that my mom had sort of told me that she may have heard as if they might be such as human beings that are born with atypical physical sex characteristics that do not fit to the definition of a typical male or typical female. I was well aware that in most parts of the world, people with congenital disabilities are often heavily discriminated and abused. I was well aware that people with the very non-reproductive disabilities are often hated by the majority of mankind. But growing up as a child, I had observed that while not everybody is in favor of the LGBT, but most people are often polite towards the LGBT community than they are towards people with disabilities. However, that had always been a worry to me, because I had learned as a child that in most parts of the world, most people worship sexual intercourse between a typical male and typical female. I had learned that most people do not only worship sexual intercourse between a typical male and typical female, but most people view the world through the perspective of sexual intercourse between a typical male and typical female. I had been aware that most people rate the value of other human beings based on their ability to be involved in the sexual intercourse between a typical male and a typical female. Basically, I had learned that for most people, there was nothing more important than being a person that is highly standard, or a person that is highly qualified to perform sexual intercourse. This meant that if a human being has a body that people find to be what they qualify as the best for sexual intercourse, or what in most communities is often described as sexy, or a behavior that most people consider to be what they call sexy, or anything else that people can consider to be what they so-called sexy, then this meant to most people you are going to be rated the best. And as a human being, it was self-evident to me that in most cases, what we find to be the opposite of what we call the best is often what we are going to treat as the worst. I was well aware that as it was very important to me to grow up into becoming a civilized and just human being, the most disgusting thing to me, the worst kind of person on the planet that I could imagine, was obviously an uncivilized, unjust human being. But I knew this did not mean that that is so for everybody else. I felt the need to further search and confirm what was the truth about Michael Jackson, because I had heard several different rumors about Michael Jackson. But due to the fact that I was a child willing to grow up into a basic, adequate, civilized, and just human being, I felt that my questions should be answered by evidence. So I searched for official documentations about Michael Jackson. When it came to official documentations, more especially human biographies, I often trusted Wikipedia. So I searched for the document Michael Jackson Wikipedia. On the document, I found that Wikipedia stated that in 1983, Michael Jackson was diagnosed with discoid lupus erythematosus, and in 1986, Michael Jackson was diagnosed with vitiligo. Wikipedia also stated that in January 1984, Michael Jackson's scalp had been burned in an accident when filming the Pepsi commercial, which resulted in second to third degree burns. Yes, the information that I found on Wikipedia answered some of my questions, but the remaining question was what was the cause of the atypical physical sex characteristics that I had detected on Michael Jackson, and what was the cause of the signs and symptoms of severe genital injuries that I had detected on Michael Jackson, as well as some of the non-reproductive signs and symptoms that could not be explained by the disorders, diseases, and injuries that had been mentioned on Wikipedia. Because I was well aware that discoid lupus erythematosus is not primarily a sexual disease, due to the fact that discoid lupus erythematosus is a severe immune complication. It can cause adverse effects, but it hardly directly affects the reproductive system, and so is vitiligo, which is a depigmentation skin disorder. Though regarding Michael Jackson's atypical sexual characteristics, Wikipedia had clearly stated the fact that long before Michael Jackson had contracted vitiligo or discoid lupus erythematosus, the community had publicly questioned Michael Jackson about his atypical physical sex characteristics. So this confirmed to me that I was not detecting what's not there. However, while Wikipedia did not give us the results or the reason or the cause to why Michael Jackson had the atypical physical sex characteristics, but Wikipedia clearly stated that most of the public community often proposed that Michael Jackson was a transgender, or Michael Jackson had been taking female hormones, or Michael Jackson was gay or lesbian, in a way to sort of propagate an answer to the reason for Michael Jackson's atypical physical characteristics. With that, Wiki had also clearly stated the fact that imposing all of the public's claims and propagated statements, Michael Jackson had always clearly stated that he was not homosexual, gay, or transgender. I searched for official documentations about the health and appearance of Michael Jackson that were directly provided by Michael Jackson. I searched for Michael Jackson's direct answers or presentations of information concerning his health and appearance in speaking interviews. I directly searched for any other kind of information concerning his health and appearance that he may have provided when speaking to the public community in other places. Well, as soon as I searched for Michael Jackson's responses and Michael Jackson's public provided information concerning his health and appearance, I realized that Michael Jackson was often questioned about his atypical physical sex characteristics way more than I had imagined when Wiki had stated this fact. I realized, though, that in every occasion where Michael Jackson was questioned about the cause of his atypical physical sex characteristics, Michael Jackson always explained that his atypical physical sex characteristics were natural. In every occasion where Michael Jackson was publicly questioned about the cause of his physical sex characteristics being atypical, Michael Jackson always responded to the explanation of a definition that led to me learning about what is so-called intersex conditions. Michael Jackson did not always directly use the term intersex, but in every interview where Michael Jackson had to explain his congenital biological condition, Michael Jackson always defined his congenital disorders in a definition that is directly identical to the definition of intersex conditions. Michael Jackson always defined his congenital conditions using words that are directly synonymous to disorder of sex development. This fact had laid a very, very bothering question to me, that as I am already aware that people are often heavily discriminative against people with non-reproductive congenital disabilities, then how much more should be the suffering and abuse that is often inflicted on people that are born with sexual disabilities or sexual disorders? What must be the painful life of most of intersex people? With this, and what I had just came across, I then began to question even further. I then began to want to find the answer to this even further, through now the question which was so ringing to me in the form of, where are other people like Michael Jackson? What do they usually experience? What kind of life do they usually go through? And if the Americans with Disabilities Act was only passed in year 1990, then how much inclusion and protection does it provide to intersex people? I was aware of the different kinds of hostilities that mankind had inflicted on each other and our very planet. And I was well aware of some of the inequalities that had existed amongst mankind in the past. At school, I had also been taught about how the history of law improvement was something that took time and progressed in very, very slow movements, due to the fact that human beings are sometimes very intentionally ignorant to even very basic things that we know are coming back to destroy us all in the future. However, given the fact that as I had begun searching for Michael Jackson's further interviews and watching his presentations and conversations concerning his health and appearance, I had learned in those occasions that people that often discussed with Michael Jackson about his intersex nature had always been very rude, insulting, unofficial, and well, way beyond what I might expect of people that are breaking a law based on prejudice. So to me, this sort of indicated that the law itself might have a ground that does not yet protect the rights of such people. This indication was, well, just a suggestion, just a question, but at most I had hoped that evidence would prove my doubts wrong. However, with all the hopes I had already learned, I was already hearing, I was already seeing a very heartbreaking fact, that in all these conversations where Michael Jackson publicly addressed matters concerning his health and appearance, Michael Jackson had already explained that most people are often very discriminative towards him. Michael Jackson had already explained that he has a very strange kind of physical nature. Michael Jackson had already portrayed himself as a lonely, distressed, and hurt person that had been abused by most people in different parts of the world, including very, very heavily by his own family, since being a child and throughout his life. This had already set a fact that I could see, but I was not yet willing to accept. But objectivity was a very, very important principle in how I should guide myself and my life and my family. So, I questioned, as much as I can see the evidence of what was going on in the life of Michael Jackson, and as much as I feel that Michael Jackson may have been telling the truth about himself, as much as I can recognize how hurt he looks in these reports, in these appeals, in these cries, in these speeches, in these songs. But what if I am just the one that is falling for what he says? What if I'm just the one that is falling for him simply because maybe I am ignoring the fact that yes, I did so fall in love with his very music itself after I learned it? What if I am being subjective due to any other reason of which I had learned about him, or I had already noticed that I prefer about his way of behaving or his style of self-presentation? So, I had to look back to the fact that Albert Einstein always said, "A man should look for what is and not what he thinks should be." So I knew that I should look for what was the truth about Michael Jackson and not what I think should be. Yes, I was looking at facts. Yes, my beliefs and suggestions were based on evidence, were based on what I was observing from physical evidence, from the actions of people, from the words of the very Michael Jackson himself, the owner of, well, the body and his life. But it was important to remember that sometimes, beyond single evidence, it is important to have different sorts of evidence. So I had to search for statistical evidence. I had to search for other intersex people. I had to search for clinical evidence. which this meant I had to follow up through my studies and begin to commit myself to this investigation, which this decision I began to take at 8th grade in year 2012. I began to pay this careful attention to carry this out through the years of my studies. I began to dedicate myself to investigating this case, even by talking to other people that I meet in community, even to talking to people that I meet in government authorities. Basically, I began to dedicate myself into officially investigating the case of Michael Jackson. In truth, I was not very bothered by the rumors of other people, because, well, what was more official was what the person says about themselves and what evidence says about everything. But the main fact that caused contradiction and debate, that caused the question of who was telling the truth, was actually the two groups, of which is what Michael Jackson says about himself, in comparison to what the authority that had performed an autopsy on the body of Michael Jackson had said about Michael Jackson's body after Michael Jackson passed away. In year 2009, when Michael Jackson passed away at the age of 50, Michael Jackson's biological family, the Jackson family, requested an autopsy, which was performed thereafter by the UCLA. On the autopsy report, on page 3, under the section External Examination, the passage read as follows: "The body is identified by the toe tags and is that of an unemblemed, refrigerated adult black male who appears to be the stated age of 50 years. The body weighs 136 pounds, measures 69 inches in length, and is thin. Over the lower back are several 1/4 to 1/2 inch perimortem abrasions. In brackets, it says, comment, seen photographs show beads on the bed." Well, if you look at this passage, it describes the body of Michael Jackson to be that which is well to fit the definition of a typical adult black male's body. The autopsy report does not identify or recognize or state any irregularities that make Michael Jackson an irregular or a typical adult male. At the end of the beginning passage on page 5 of the autopsy report, the last lines give information regarding the sexual physical characteristics of Michael Jackson, more specifically the genitalia. The passage reads as follows: "The genitalia are those of an adult black male. The penis appears uncircumcised. The extremities show no edema, joint deformity, or abnormal mobility." On page 7 of the autopsy report, the ending passage under the section Genital System reads as follows: "The prostate is moderately enlarged, with a prominent intravesical middle median lobe. The prostatic parenchyma is nodular. Both testes are in the scrotum and are unremarkable and without trauma," claims the autopsy report. And on page 2 of the microscopic report, there is an ending passage that reads as follows: "The prostate gland, slide V, shows hypoplastic glands in a nodular configuration. Minimal lymphoid infiltrate is present. There is no malignancy." And for verification, yes, that was the information from the autopsy report of case number 2009-04415 on the body of Jackson Michael. These details completely contradicted the description that Michael Jackson had given of the natural condition of the sexual characteristics of his body. Now this meant one had to be lying. Either this was Michael Jackson or the autopsy report. Based on this contradiction, I continued to further investigate. Concerning investigation in action, I searched for more information about intersex conditions in general. I searched for what was the legal status of protection of the human rights of intersex people in the United States. I searched for the history of other intersex people, and I searched for more official information, official documentations that were provided by Michael Jackson about his health, and I searched for more official information that were provided by other people about the health and appearance of Michael Jackson. With further information, I learned that Michael Jackson had publicly reported that as a child he had been subjected to what is known as intersex medical interventions. Michael Jackson had also stated that not only was he born with sexual differences or sexual impairments, but as an intersex person he was also born with non-reproductive neurological and physical impairments that come alongside the sexual impairments on the base of his intersex condition, or as the base of being a person born with intersex characteristics. With that understanding, I also learned that Michael Jackson was not only forced or subjected to medical interventions that were based on changing his sexual characteristics, but Michael Jackson was also subjected to interventions that were based on redirecting the function of his natural neurological and physical impairments. On the statistical findings, I learned of other early intersex activists such as Cheryl Chase, Manny Mitchell, Betsy Driver, Solly Gross, Ntobiseng Mokoena, Julius Kagwa, and others. And with that, I compared the experiences of these intersex activists to the experiences and reports from Michael Jackson. I compared the type of propaganda that I see on the case of Michael Jackson to the type of propaganda that I learned of in the history of other early intersex activists. Along with that, it had also been years since the young intersex activist Caster Semenya in South Africa had already become a public subject. I began to realize that the kind of abuse that was inflicted on Michael Jackson is directly identical to the kind of abuse that is often imposed on other intersex people. I realized that the kind of insults that were often directed towards Michael Jackson are the direct kind of insults that are often used at intersex people. Because most of the very public that claimed Michael Jackson was a normal male, however, could not control their hateful feelings when it came to how they called Michael Jackson on public media sources such as magazines and news programs. Michael Jackson was often titled as a hermaphrodite, a mulatto, a castrato, a transgender, an animal, and well, what is beyond what I can say as well, my mouth should have a limit as a Christian. So, this was very heartbreaking information, and I had to make a decision. Who do I believe? Evidence? What I can see, the correspondence between Michael Jackson's life and the life of other intersex people, or throw away all the sad, heartbreaking, traumatizing desperate truth about Michael Jackson that everybody's ignoring, and focus on the fact that most people in the modern day have begun to embrace Michael Jackson as a pop figure that was mainly discriminated based on his race, while the minority of the population claimed Michael Jackson was a pop figure that was mainly discriminated because people were jealous of his pop success. However, living in the community, never had I learned the need for anybody to be jealous of Michael Jackson, because never had I found anybody that really enjoyed the music of Michael Jackson, his other performance art, his other teachings, as much as I did, or a very minority which I had learnt of in the history of Michael Jackson, while speaking of the minority of the few people that had been directly friends with Michael Jackson. Because yes, of legal findings, I had learnt the heartbreaking fact that the human rights of intersex people are not legally protected in most parts of the world. I learned that intersex people do not have legal protection to the right to their physical integrity and bodily autonomy. I learned that intersex people do not have legal protection against discrimination. I learned that intersex people do not have legal protection to the right of declaring that they are intersex. Basically, I learned that intersex characteristics are always forced to be murdered in order for the body of which they were born to prevail. With this hurtful truth, I made the decision to verify one more time by performing clinical evidence. Also due to the reason of that I had not yet learned or came across an official document that was provided by Michael Jackson stating the specific intersex condition that he was born with. I do not know if Michael Jackson had directly stated the specific intersex condition that he was born with, but then maybe the statement had been murdered, deleted, what can I call it? Or whether, due to the very fact of unprotected human rights, he had never got to declare this fact. Because, well, I had learned now that intersex people are often forced to keep the truth about their conditions as secrecy. So I went ahead and I performed clinical evidence. So yes, in accordance with clinical evidence, I went on to search for the list of intersex conditions that could be directly coordinated to the kind of signs and symptoms that I had detected on the body of Michael Jackson. I went on to search for the list of intersex conditions that could be directly characteristic of the kind of signs and symptoms of the non-reproductive impairments that I had detected on the body of Michael Jackson, which happened to be aligned or identical to the kind of signs and symptoms that Michael Jackson had admitted to be natural or existing of his body. With that direction, system, and application, clinical evidence showed that Michael Jackson was born with the condition that is often called ambiguous genitalia. Clinical evidence also showed that Michael Jackson had been subjected to medical interventions, which meant that it was going to be very difficult to confirm the specific intersex condition that Michael Jackson had been born with. However, clinical evidence had the suggestion of the most probable intersex conditions that Michael Jackson may have had. The list read as follows. Number 1. Partial androgen insensitivity syndrome on grade 4, Number 2, partial androgen insensitivity syndrome on grade 5. Number 3, true hermaphroditism or oval testicular DSD, which is oval testicular disorder of sex development. Number 4, CHD7 mutation of Kelman syndrome, often called charge syndrome. And at number 5, 49XXXXY syndrome, a condition related to the polysemy of chromosomes. Such type of those conditions often related to the famous intersex condition, Klinefelter syndrome. With these meanings or interpretations, any other intersex condition that is related to the symptoms of these listed conditions is well at the nearest probability as well. However, it is very hard to be certain on what was the exact specific condition. I continue to further search, and till this day of my report, there are still other verifications above my searches that I am still continuing to look for. However, I cannot promise that that part I shall find, but if any updates change from what I had discovered then, I will come back and alert. Yes. I do not mean to have any mistaken information, and even more, I do not mean to provide any kind of incorrect information to the public. I repeat that I am still further investigating, and I have come forth with my report of how I engaged in the investigation of the case of Michael Jackson, because I was mainly hurt by the experience that Michael Jackson had to go through simply based on being born with sexual differences. Our world has lived so long. We have solved the matters of other inequalities. Why is it that we human beings have to go one by one and never on other situations? Why is it that we cannot just let justice prevail in its complete dynamic? I sought to do this investigation in the first place because of the concern of the truth of the nature of Michael Jackson, because of the fact that I was aware, or I had learned, or I was observing that Michael Jackson appeared to be somebody that had been physically abused, somebody that had been silenced, somebody that had been propagated. Based on these reasons, I have went through this report, and it began to be a dream that one day I must find the truth, and I must send the truth to the world, not only because of the hurt that Michael Jackson went through, but also because I learned that Michael Jackson, to me, or to what I understood, in English, could define as a person that was an intersex saint, a person that also dedicated most of his life to suffering in order to educate us on the truth, and a person that also dedicated a lot of his time of political activism to feeding other matters that do not concern intersex issues, which are most of the matters that are often spoken about his philanthropy. Matters of child welfare, matters of poverty, matters he engaged in the very racial politics itself, matters concerning other gender inequalities, matters concerning other world wars, other religious disagreements across our planet. Based on all that this one has given to us, I was troubled that in year 2001, when the terrorist attack of 9/11 occurred on the United States of America on September 11th. As a person that does not have legal protection of his human rights, and a person that was towards the final years of his suffering life, Michael Jackson did not have that much money anymore. But he did not sit down and say, due to the fact that I'm out of money, and due to the fact that my body's more injured, and due to the fact that this is way beyond my very tiny strength remaining, I shall not do anything. The very sorrow he had, the hurt that he had always felt for mankind, stunned his heart once again and dragged him forward to ask the very question that was troubling him. What could he give to us, as he does not have the power, as he is out of money now, by releasing a song called What More Can I Give? He dedicated that song to asking us, what could he give? To love and teach the will of God unto us, to love and teach the truth unto us, to love and to teach us, to hold and to need us, to need the heavens and to present the heavens unto us, for the sake of protecting our planet. So do I say today, children of the world, we have got what we can give. We can say the word to let intersex people live. We can say peace. We can support justice. It is in our power. Whether we are on a good standard of economy, whether you are an orphan, whether you are a person that is often discriminated based on your race or your gender or any of the other inequalities that have been legally solved, how about the people that still lie outside the inclusion of our law? Can we come together and stand for this? As in, we must come together and focus on standing for the complete prevalence of justice. This very dream which I had was very threatened, very inconfident, very afraid, because I am well aware that I am one human being in this world. If for so many years before I was born, nobody or no law has tried to make a better world for our fellow intersex people, who am I to come to the world and believe that through the discoveries or learnings that are the results of my investigations, I am going to touch somebody and make somebody feel different? What special am I from anybody that has came forward? The UN High Commissioner, as in the former UN High Commissioner of Human Rights, Sir Zeid Ra'ad Al Hussein, brought forth his appeals concerning the situation of the abuse that is imposed on intersex people. But of course, one man cannot crack the ice of hatred. If we are going to have excuses of that it's our religion, it's our cultures, it's our traditions, knowing that these beliefs are upheld and protected by how we interpret them, how we present them, how we insult them, and what we make of them. This is not to say they do not exist, but this is to say they are philosophies, and philosophies can be misinterpreted. Philosophies can have been mistakenly carried, but however, philosophies can be blessed when we come together and correct the misinterpretations that we have expressed or that we have presented of these philosophies. I cannot lie and say that I feel very strengthful that I as an individual can change the lives of intersex people. I cannot stand and declare that I can change the law and set freedom for intersex people. But I can say I do believe that intersex people can be free on this very planet Earth. I do believe that all together, when we come together, we can make it happen. I do believe that none of us are confused if intersex people are human beings or not. I believe that it is in the same nature of all kind of species to recognize their fellow beings. I believe that most people, or many people, are aware of the existence of intersex people, but I believe as mankind we have been ignoring this. Because how would we abuse them if we do not know they exist? How would we call them with words such as hermaphrodite? How would we swear them? How would we know who to attack? How would we manage to identify between a transgender and an intersex person if we do not know the idea of that there could be such as an intersex person? How would we let them fail to pass through the passages of our public cities by being inflicted by massive rape if we do not know what are their differences and what is the state of their nature? To me, the brutality that we have had, the confidence in evil that we have carried to inflict on intersex people for so long, makes me fear. I felt like after I have learned what is going on, I should just keep this to myself and just decide that I will love them privately, just me and my family, and I should not take out any appeal, because honestly, I am powerless. I was afraid that if I come forward, I could get hurt. I was afraid that if I come forward, I could die. I am still afraid at this very moment as I speak. And with that fear, I am well aware that I could come forward and cry and nothing happens. But beyond that fear, I was carried by hope. Hope that was carried by inspiration. That in all the riots, in all the muzzles, in all the puzzles, in all the lies that were put forth as an anti-progress open secret of pretending we do not know that intersex people exist while we do, of pretending that their nature is harmful to us or traumatizing or creepy, of us accepting to work with the devil for so many years. Above all of that is the nature of the heart of mankind. I learned that the nature of the heart of mankind can really grieve for its purpose. For the few intersex activists that we know, speaking directly of the one of which I am reporting off in this video, Michael Jackson, I was inspired to see the few people that were courageous to stand alongside him. And however, me not knowing to what degree did they love him, I was encouraged by the very fact that I know love must have been a factor for all those who stood against all the corruption that had attacked him in all the years of him appealing to mankind. Love must have been the factor for one to risk their life in order to defend another of which they know is beyond being the least favorable of mankind. To me, as hurt and disappointed as I felt and as I feel about the current status of the insecurities of our intersex community, hope, though, shuttered around my fears with a question: if I give up, does it mean I accept that this is the dark secret that mankind are going to carry forever? Am I throwing away the efforts of those who have stood alongside some of the intersex activists, of those who have put little efforts, medium efforts, or large efforts to help carry their history in order to educate us of the situation going on in the lives of intersex people. Am I going to let my fear stand ahead of me? And the truth is, a huge part of me felt like yes. Enough is enough. I cannot do this. Because I learned that those very people were attacked. When Michael Jackson came forward and began presenting his intersex activism and began to present other philanthropic works, other humanitarian efforts, other sacrifices that he began to take for saving the lives of mankind, dedicating his life to charity and improving our planet. He was noticed by President Ronald Reagan on May 14th of year 1984. Due to the fact that President Reagan had noticed Michael Jackson and called this intersex being a face of God, million Americans felt different about it. This was America when people criticized the Reagan White House. This is the nation to which I have always looked up to. This is the nation of Abraham Lincoln. This is the nation of which I believe in the modern day upholds the center of world peace, of world justice, of diplomacy, and of education. To me, this was beyond a questionable evidence or a questionable disappointment. It was beyond a questionable danger. I was way too small as one individual to say I shall stand above my fears. Because if this is happening in our America, the most optimistic nation on the face of the planet, as Sir George H.W. Bush once called it, then me, as a child that was born in the land of South Africa, in a place where intersex people are often crushed into what the Bantu people call the Yamutis, which is their traditional medicines, in a land where they do not even try the very thing of keeping them alive while changing the nature of their body, in a land where those that are kept alive are not even supported by any trustworthy friend that can try to spread any kind of message, in a land where people are still arguing on the very racism, where people are still revenging themselves, in a land where me, as a young child, as a young white South African, is put under prejudice my very self, based on the endless ego of revenge and wars that the hearts of many South Africans have dedicated themselves to. Who was I? What would I do? Where would I find somebody to help me? What would my word be? I prayed. I cried. Many times I picked up the pen and sketched a draft of how would I present the report if I would. How would I appeal to the world? In which way could I have a word that could touch that center of the heart of mankind and discover what we all have forgotten about ourselves? I prayed that, Lord, I have not that power. Every day I sleep, I pray that may you please, heavens, make sure that tomorrow you may touch the hearts of mankind yourself. And Creator, I may wake up in a world where we all see things differently. Can you recreate our souls? Can you wash us? For no matter what excuses we may claim to prefer, love, or uphold, for no matter what we can find to be important over righteousness, but the truth is, God did not create the standards of righteousness based on race or gender. the standards of righteousness apply for all of us. What is right for me as a white person is right for another person as a black person. What is right for them is right unto all of us, young or old. What is right to me as a female is right to a male person, and is right to them, poor or rich. With that concept, I continued to pray, and I continued to live. However, I could not bear the hurt inside, that I knew every day that this severe brutalization was going on, inflicting on intersex people. Alongside that fear, my other fear was threatening. The guilt that lied in me. I could not deny that before the eyes of the Creator of heaven and earth, it would be foolish for me to say Michael Jackson was not a saint. For the fact is, the question stood before me: on which other basis would such hurt bodies, such hurt souls, such broken hearts, such traumatized brains of beings choose to live in such severe abuse in order to educate us about their nature and invite us to the peace of justice, to the true accomplishment of a vitality for all? If they know how less they are compared to us, why don't they just give up on us? Why don't they just commit suicide? Why do they even care about living in the first place? This question really haunted my soul. Every day and night, I looked back at the million years of which intersex people had been murdered, and I looked at the fact that it is now the modern day, when technologies have been improved. It is now the days when our equipment of establishing and publishing are now in defense towards legal systems. At that point, it coincides with the moment when it appears to me that the Creator of heaven and earth spared the breath of these hurt beings, our intersex activists, that no matter how dead is the condition of their bodies, but they may persevere through all that abuse, so that the gospel of Christ may have lived through the bodies of intersex people. The Creator must have shown unto us kindness, as the Creator shown to us through Michael Jackson, saving all of us in that intersex body. I believe the Creator loves us all. And yes, this was not the doubt. But the doubt to me, the worry to me, was that why don't we all feel this way? How am I going to begin, and what is going to be my ending, if I attempt to appeal on this truth? My fears went on to carry me, up until I was done preparing the drafts of my reports, in case one day I decide to come forward. I packed them away in the shelf, because I did not have the strength to. I am unsecure in the very place where I live. But the Creator of heaven and earth continued to still appear through younger intersex activists. The word of peace continues to sound when we speak of other inequalities. I remembered how many years had other inequalities existed, And how gracious was it when we broke down those barriers of other inequalities. I remembered the kind of excuses that the Nazis had. I remembered the kind of excuses that the Ku Klux Klan had. And I asked myself, if we, the most optimistic species of nature, human beings, could come together and bring down racism and bring down gender inequality between males and females, why is it that we cannot do it now? I asked the Creator. Please, if there is ever a way, above all my fears, I so do will to sacrifice myself for it. However, whenever I had to step up and speak, I would freeze, I would stutter, I would get panic attacks, and I would pack my report aside. It was only in the year 2016 when I found out that President Donald Trump was deciding to take position in office. One of the people that had stood alongside Michael Jackson in most of the public accusations that were meant to ridicule his situation of being intersex by people accusing him of being a child molester. Sir Donald Trump, yes, the man that has been accused of being an autocrat, of being subjective, of being a racist, of being one that only cares for himself. I learned of this man through the path of me investigating the truth about Sir Michael Jackson. I learned that in the very 1980s, when President Ronald Reagan was being criticized for holding Michael Jackson in the White House, Sir Donald Trump was amongst the few rich businessmen that came with a polite-looking attitude, that came with a peaceful face around Michael Jackson, and risked his life, that as the rest of the American citizens called it a negative revolution, an evil action, that we are now managed to embrace people that we often call sexually ambiguous, that we call androgynous, when everybody else was still afraid to come forward and say, we can consider a person that is sexually different, a person that only survives by the communities of the LGBT people. Sir Donald Trump was courageous enough to come and stand beside him. He was courageous enough to befriend him and began to work with him, so far as to accompany him in other acts of humanitarian efforts, such as when he befriended the escort to Michael Jackson's personal friend, HIV/AIDS activist Ryan White. This was back in those days when not many people, when not really much of any crowd actually could come forth and defend Michael Jackson, or befriend Michael Jackson, or even admit the truth about his skills, his talent, his positive abilities. When not many people were willing to even express, or at least mention, the very charity efforts that Michael Jackson had done for the normal communities. The very man of which many of us call a dictator, a narcissist, a selfish person, Sir Donald Trump was amongst the few people that were willing to stand in that position. And not only did he do that, but Sir Donald Trump realized that there was a shift in the support that people carried towards Republicans because of the criticism they had for the Reagan White House. And after that succeeding Reagan's term, in 1990, President George H.W. Bush continued in the path of expressing leaders that are born with disabilities or have acquired disabilities. Well, most people are often focused on the idea of that solving political issues or community problems or inequalities is solving racism. Whenever somebody goes outside the subject of racism, people do not consider that as one being a war hero, as one being a pacifist. A person is only considered a pacifist when they sacrifice themselves in order to save black people. When a person stands up in order to save any other endangered minority, it is often considered that that person is going off to the left wing, or the person is going to the far, far right. However, as I had learned of the participation that Sir Donald Trump had in making the history of Michael Jackson, from his friendship since year 1988 all the way to the late 2000s, up until the death of Michael Jackson, and so after. Even after the death of Michael Jackson, Sir Donald Trump was amongst the very few people that mentioned in an interview with Larry King that Michael Jackson had though suffered from bad surgeries, and in all this pain it is important for him to state that he was heavily carried by bad doctors. Not many people were willing to even state opinions that implied what was carried in the silenced truth of the abuse that Michael Jackson had experienced based on being intersex. So as I saw President Donald Trump step up to take in office, I began to consider, maybe I should come. If he has carried these opinions with him till now, and he is still willing to come to public office, why don't I try and see if maybe I could reach out to people like him? Because in truth, he had been criticized by the public very much. But the truth is that to the Creator of heaven and earth, sacrificing oneself for peace is not only defined by sacrificing oneself for black people. Sacrificing oneself for peace is sacrificing oneself for any human being that is getting hurt, any human being that is being abused, any minority, any individual. It's sacrificing oneself for righteousness as a whole. This is not to say I'm saying Donald Trump is a man that I know his actions shall always be holy, but I am saying as a human being, I felt that as all that criticism had been out, I should take my time to the pain in my heart, to the pain that I know is the pain in the kingdom of heaven, of how long we have buried the truth of intersex nature. For every living being is created through the image of the Creator of heaven and earth, bearing any kind of natural characteristic of mankind is bearing a certain part of the image of God. Thus meaning, it is bearing a certain part of God as a whole. This did not sit well with me. I could not settle to just forget it. So I said to myself, well, since I am not confident enough to come forward and appeal, and I can see the pressure surrounding people such as Sir Donald Trump that had participated in sacrificing themselves for many different minorities that other people do not recognize or find valuable, including sacrificing themselves in other occasions or projects that were involved in improving the rights of the very black people themselves. I began to say, maybe I should prepare my reports. I should assess what I've collected, assess my evidence, and see if there's a way for me to begin. But how would I reach to Sir Donald Trump? Because a part of me began to feel that I have one bet, I have one question. I want to see what this man will say if anybody brings up the case of Michael Jackson as he is in office. In that 2016, I put that forth as a test to my faith. Will Sir Donald Trump finally turn his head away to the endless story of the one lonely soul that is forever turned down and forever propagated? And in year 2019, the documentary Leaving Neverland aired, accusing Michael Jackson of having sexually molested Sir Wade Robson and Sir James Safechuck, two people of whom had been witnesses on the side of Michael Jackson against people that have accused him of the very crime before. The public waited to see, and Sir Donald Trump came forth once again and declared that Michael Jackson was innocent. This was at the time when other people that had befriended Michael Jackson began to feel fed up and back down, and he still said it. As I searched and found that information, along that I began to realize that as I was mourning, as I was in sorrow, as I was busy protecting what I'm trying to do and my insecurities in the land of which I live, I had missed an occasion. I had missed the situation of where Sir Jermaine Jackson, a member of Michael Jackson's biological family, had publicly attacked Sir Donald Trump. If this man was really a dictator, as most people claim, for all the criticisms of which he had stepped into, when he knew those were not decisions that were in the favor of the majority, why would he have not led his actions against these suffering minorities, if truly he is the subjective person that many people claim he is? I began to have questions about Sir Donald Trump. I began to ask myself, was Donald Trump amongst the people that the heaven's eyes looks upon in search for an Abraham Lincoln for intersex people? Can I lead my projects, my dreams in preparation that one day I can reach to partner with his efforts and we can free intersex people together? Yes. This sounded quite delusional on one end, because I was here with my insecurities in South Africa, and I could see that he was far away with his insecurities in our modern day, where a man can be criticized for supporting the suffering minorities while being a citizen of the great peaceful land of Sir Abraham Lincoln. How am I going to accomplish this peaceful dream? What if I do not make it to even connect to the people that can manage to stand with me, such as the very Sir Donald Trump? And even if I was managed to connect to these people, who are we as a minority going to be against the majority of mankind that are willing to brutally ignore the truth of the hurt that intersex people are experiencing in front of us every day, more clearly of the hurt that our very selves we know is a result of our own actions. How are we going to attempt the address of such an intentional barrier of hate? How are we going to manage to bring down a wall held by almost everyone? But as I questioned these possibilities, probabilities, and impossibilities, as my fear surrounded these doubts, on the other hand, was a truth that is bound to live forever. That one who believes that there is such as justice should know that every act of justice is a living being. Every virtue is a servant of the kingdom of heaven. Every act that has swum around mankind, that have flew in the skies of our beautiful planet, that has swung around across the world trying to reach our hearts, shall always pass this earth and be forgotten on earth, but always remembered in the kingdom of heaven. For that act had always been part of the kingdom of heaven. It was led by the kingdom of heaven through the one who received it, through the one that contributed to it, the one that saved it. And that act shall always lead life to appear once again to the hearts of all of us living on earth, appealing for progress in gratitude of that a certain heart of a certain being had accommodated it once upon this world. This meant that every just act of the people that have participated in creating the positives in the life of Michael Jackson were angelic acts looking upon us in search for progress as we cry. So I questioned myself, shall I ignore the hope of these acts, the hope of justice? Shall I abandon the faith that God has upon the little space for us to make a better place? Shall I let them go to be forgotten? And never to be celebrated, to be recognized, to be welcomed, to be glorified? Most of all, shall I ignore the fact that they live in the kingdom of heaven and let them get washed away to death, to never live? In the warmth of the kingdom of heaven, planet Earth. What future shall we bear in that sense? What protection shall we expect for the children coming after us? What judgment are we asking for towards the kingdom of heaven? Who am I to dare? Who am I to murder? Who am I to betray? What shall I earn? What shall be the outcome? Why don't I put aside the hopes of hell that the majority of people that had participated in devil's will of hurting intersex people may not give up? Why don't I focus on the hopes of the kingdom of heaven? For the Creator of all the hearts of mankind is one, the Holy. Why don't I put aside the intentions of the intruder? For discrimination has always lived for us to question, how far can freedom reach? How great can peace be preached? Is there even such as a holy law that one could breach? Shall I let myself activate these questions that were writ by the Satan? Shall I let these questions live above the hopes of the kingdom of heaven? No, I shall not. I felt that no, I cannot. I should not let myself bow down to weakness. I should not let myself bow down to the spirit of revenge. For it is an act of revenge for one to hold back on coming forth to others in order to repeal on a matter that one knows was denied in the past. It is an act of not forgiving. And one who believes in forgiveness should know that forgiveness believes in us too. Forgiveness believes that we all have the ability to forgive ourselves for the inferior acts that we committed yesterday and begin a new day and begin to live the fate of freedom together. It was then that I began to step aside and search for the positive values and search for all the points of light, the points of encouragement that could help me to open my eyes, let go the sorrow of yesterday. It was then that I prayed that the kingdom of heaven may please carry us through to begin this new day. And I may try hard enough to make another American dream come true. For as I was learning about the history of Michael Jackson, a positive that I had noticed, though in sorrow I could not easily lean to this positive, was the fact that when I compared the experiences of the intersex activists living in the Western countries, such as the United States of America, to the intersex activists that lived in places like South Africa, I realized that yes, as hurtful as it was that our great land of America is not yet in a state where our law protects the human rights of intersex people. But there was still a difference between the hope I could attain from diplomatic governed places and autocratic governed places. I learned that in places such as the United States of America, in truth, as all the hurt went on towards people such as our currently discussed intersex activist Michael Jackson, and as criticism went on towards the people that stood alongside him or recognized his efforts, such as Sir Ronald Reagan. However, the journalists in the United States of America could publish what was going on. That was point one. Some business people that were not willing to actually befriend Michael Jackson in a positive way, such as Sir Donald Trump, could divide their souls into doing half good and half bad. They could take the opportunity to let the 50% of hate rule how they perceive of Michael Jackson, how they shall pay Michael Jackson in business engagements, how they shall treat him, but let the 50% good drag them towards recognizing his abilities as a human being to engage with in business, in different kinds of occupations that feed our necessities as mankind. That was point 2. And point 3, I had a question. If I look at how many intersex activists do I know at the age of Michael Jackson, from which places did they come from? Yes, they lived a painful life. As sad as it is to say, but they did get the glimpse of life. But on the other hand, intersex activists that attempted to even be in most African countries were always directly murdered before any inspiring history could be built. I imagined what would be an America where all citizens of the United States agreed or agreed to themselves personally, individually, that every person that executes an act of kindness towards any intersex person shall be killed immediately. In such an America, Sir Ronald Reagan would have been assassinated immediately. All his bodyguards would have abandoned him. and so is everybody else that stood alongside an intersex human rights activist. Now, with these differences that I noticed, between the way in which the surroundings of the intersex activists living in places like the United States were in comparison to the surroundings of the intersex activists living in places such as South Africa, I began to look up to, how about a second chance? Or a third chance if it is. Or a fourth chance if it is. However, whatever. How about I give it a chance again? Maybe the lives of these early intersex activists were hurt so painfully because it was only the beginning of the establishment of intersex movement, since after other inequalities such as racism and other disability rights movements had been resolved, after centuries of all of us living in wars in a world where intersex people were buried aside. What if we take another step? With all the intersex people that are currently alive, some of the early, and all the youth, what if in step by step we could get there? What if a chance was waiting ahead? It was then that I prepared this report. However, given the huge amount of assessment and medical explanations, verifications, calculations that I had to go through, I could not reach out to release it in the first term of Sir Donald Trump. His term passed aside to the succeeding term of Sir Joe Biden. But in year 2022, I first began by publishing a foundation on the truth of the history of Sir Michael Jackson. As I continued to work on other reports, it was then that I began to come forth to the public in hope that the second chance shall lead us a way forward, at most to the final, peaceful, perfect achievement of the fate of freedom, if not so, almost there. So I went on to publish a few documents and release 2 videos concerning the truth about the situation of Michael Jackson in these recent 4 years during the term of Sir Joe Biden. In the process of me putting together those publications that I released, as I looked back at the different documentaries and different documents concerning the history of different intersex activists, I began to realize even more that people such as intersex activist Julius Kagwa have came forth and declared that he has hope towards the Western churches in the United States. He is most heartbroken when those kind of optimistic cardinals are unable to welcome the nature of intersex. It is not much a shock when people in Africa are unable to welcome it, because even in terms of supposedly resolved matters such as racism, such as protecting oneself away from germs, such as abiding by international law, such as protecting education and civil liberties, most African communities are unable to carry that. It was then that I learned that people such as intersex activist Julius Kagwa had to migrate from his country, Uganda, and try to live in what is the slight mixed community in Africa, the very land of South Africa, in order to establish his attempts of appeals for peace. I learned that, as hurtful as it is to say, but there was something very contradicting to the claims of people that claimed Michael Jackson was isolated on the basis of race. Mainly, people that claimed Michael Jackson was mainly discriminated or abused by white people. I realized that most people that practice African cultures in most societies that uphold not Christian or Buddhist principles directly, always have produced, in most cases, direct murder towards their intersex children and towards any of those who survived and attempted to appeal for any kind of life amongst mankind, even if not appealing for freedom. I learned that even our very famous early intersex activist, Solly Grass, who set the record for being the first intersex person to achieve a law mentioned concerning intersex people, giving this record to South Africa, was achieved by an intersex activist from a white family. It was not a black South African family that kept their child. It was not a black South African family that raised their child, even if in that very hurtful way, but that managed to at least attain that first appearance or early appearance that set that record for South Africa. And when I looked abroad, everybody else that came after her were all the intersex early activists living in the United States. The largest intersex organizations, such as Intersex and ISNA, were built in the United States. It was our very United States where President Reagan could name that lonely intersex Michael Jackson a face of God. Now, as a child living in the land of South Africa, where racism has not yet been put aside and peacefully sent back to hell, how possible is it for me to accomplish my dream here? I questioned. For the few people that usually send a bit of support and funding towards South African intersex organizations are usually mostly white South Africans, which are not in the most secure position regarding legal protection. Now, this was a major constraint, a major threat. However, it could not block me because now, well, I had an oath to put all negatives aside and give it a chance. But of course, giving a chance does not mean execute carelessly. So yes, of course, this major threat slowed me down. I had to build each and every document that I was working on in fear. I had to put together the 2 videos that I sent in fear. All the way up until one day I overheard that Sir Donald Trump was running for a second term again. It was then that I began to put together the current video, plan, worked on it, and well, here it is. I give it to all of us as mankind, but most of all, I bring it forth as a truth about the history of Michael Jackson, as a teaching, as an inspiration about the beginning of intersex freedom, and as an appeal for the fate of freedom as a whole. For with what I've learned is that just as once upon America, the end of slavery towards black people began through Abraham Lincoln in the United States, just as once upon America, the end of segregation began through Sir JFK in the United States, just as many more times in that peaceful land of America, accomplishments such as the release of the Americans with Disabilities Act were inspired early by the United States of America. Peaceful relations amongst countries, propositions against World War, all began once upon America, twice upon the world, and today upon life and liberty as a whole. So I send this video, most of all, to my fellow peaceful Americans. Not that I've given up on other nations, but I believe that as this video brings forth an appeal of intersex freedom through the life of the most famous intersex activist, Michael Jackson, an American citizen, once again this time, I do believe it can begin. Once more in America, and after again upon the rest of the world, and forever upon life and liberty as a whole. Amen. In the hope of the prevalence of Trinity, as we face those days of Easter, when the Messiah, Jesus Christ, was crucified, I send this video to the hope in all of us, to the nature of who we truly are as mankind, that this time around we shall not crucify the will of the Messiah. We shall let it be saved as it was the day when Sir Abraham Lincoln stood against discrimination, the day when Sir Ronald Reagan invited Michael Jackson to the White House, the day when President George H.W. Bush passed the legislation to free Americans with disabilities, and all those days when the Star-Spangled Banner rolled across the country in gratitude, in presentation of the history of America. People of America, we can do this once again. I love you, and may God bless you all. Thank you.